You can add one Sacramento Kings player from the playoff drought era from the 2006-2007 season up to last season to add to this current Kings roster to help them make the playoffs. Who are you picking and why? Frankie Cartoscelli from Sactown Sports 1140 joins me to answer that question right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports reporter and producer at ABC 10 News. And instead of doing pick any Kings player in history to add to this current Kings roster, because that would have been super easy. We would have gone with like a Chris Webber, maybe a Peja Stojakovic, a Mitch Richmond, Oscar Robertson. Like instead of going that route, I thought, let's make it a little more challenging. Let's make it a little more recent, a little more fun. Take any Sacramento Kings player from the 2006-2007 season, anyone at all, and add them to this roster right now to help this team make the playoffs. There are a lot of names that you could put in there, a lot of arguments to be made. Frankie Cartoscelli, nice enough to join me for this conversation. Really think you're going to enjoy this, but of course, we want your thoughts. We want your reaction to this, and there's not just one answer to this. There could be a lot of names that come to your mind. Make that argument and send it to me at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. Tell me who that guy is, and we'll probably discuss many of them right here on Locked On Kings. To help answer this question of which Sacramento King from the playoff drought era would we like to take and put on this current Kings roster, I'm joined right now by someone who has suffered through every single year with myself and all of you. Frankie Cartoscelli from Sports 1140 KHDK really came on the scene last year doing excellent Kings coverage, writing and covering the Kings. Actually, last couple of years, Frankie. But like I said, you've been in the trenches with all of us over these last 16 years. So you know the names that we're going to toss back and forth. And I set the precedent earlier. I'm going to set the precedent again. These are players that have been from the 2006-2000 season all the way up to this point. We pick a player and we analyze this Sacramento Kings roster currently and say, okay, which players from that roster, because the Kings have had good players over the course of these terrible years, which players would we wish that we could just handpick like it was NBA 2K and just slap on this current Kings roster? Frankie, before we even dive into some names, I want to ask you, when you look at this Kings roster, what do you think is the biggest need at this point? It could be a type of player. It could be a skill set. It could be a specific position. Like what to you is the biggest hole that you would try to fill in this exercise?
I mean, the things that jump out first, like and foremost, like they have the past couple of years, is forward depth at the small forward, power forward positions. Obviously, Keegan Murray, if he can turn into a star or even a starting caliber power forward, that's a huge win for this team. But it's what's beyond that. I mean, is Trey Lyles going to be what he was last year? Can he come up and be that backup power forward the Kings need at that position? Kent Bazemore's back in the fold. It'll be interesting to see, is he going to be the backup small forward to Harrison Barnes? It's just you can always use more forward depth. And obviously that kind of goes hand in hand with defense. And that's been the theme of the Kings the past, like you said, the past 16 years. We've been suffering through it. The defense has been bad every one of those years. Could they use more impact defenders? Absolutely. Every team in the NBA could use more impact defenders, but the Kings, more than others, need those defenders. But that's where the Mike Brown effect's going to come in. Can he come in and turn average or bad defenders into plus defenders? Can he turn good defenders like Davion Mitchell into even an elite defender? So that'll be interesting to see. But forward depth is obviously the position of need still to this moment.
Yep, that's the first thing that pops in my mind too, is wing and forward depth. And there are potentially some pieces out there that have been on the Kings over the last 16 years that you could make a reasonable argument that would be good to add to this roster. Of course, this is a fantasy off-season based conversation. This wouldn't actually happen, although some of these players that we listed might actually still be in the league. We're proceeding with the belief that they would be the type of player today that they were during their time with the Kings. It wouldn't be like an Isaiah Thomas situation where you take Isaiah Thomas from Boston and you put him here in Sacramento, be what
What?
he
That's
was
not
when he was with
that's
the Kings.
not fair.
Come on. Nope. We're
But
going just with who they
all
were with the
right,
Kings at the time. That's what we're going with. But
that's
before we
fine.
dive in, Frankie, like the first name that's going to come to everybody's mind is obviously Demarcus Cousins. So I figured we would start there. I'm sure he's on both of our lists for different reasons, but also there, at least on my end, was some slight hesitation, not because I don't think Demarcus was an absolute force in his time with the Sacramento Kings, but when you have Domantas Sabonis here again, the idea is adding a player to this roster currently that could help this roster. I think Demarcus absolutely numbers wise could help this roster, but he might take away from a little bit of what Domantas Sabonis is doing. Is Demarcus at the top of your list? Is he the first name that came to your mind?
Not at the top of my list, but he's on there. But I mean, like you said, if he were to be on, I imagine that obviously, like his name, when you do think about the Kings playoff drought, he is the number one name that comes to mind, but he's not the number one player I have on my list as far as like what this team could need and could use, like an impact player. But Boogie would have been, obviously, he would, if we could take Boogie from what, 2015, 16, that's he's 16, 17. If he could be on this team right now, yeah, that helps a lot. Having two bigs down there, kind of like a version of what Minnesota's doing right now with Cat and Gobert. I'd say arguably this might even be more so. I mean, less defense, sure, but you could have Demarcus Cousins who can hurt you on the inside and outside. Both Sabonis and Cousins can move the ball around. So now you have three players on the floor that can distribute the basketball at a high level. De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, and Demarcus Cousins. That's a lot of ball movement. That's great playmaking. Like I said, the defense would lack a little bit, but it's pretty tough to say a team with Fox, Sabonis, Prime Cousins, Harrison Barnes, Davion Mitchell wouldn't be a top 6-7 team in the West right now. So hard to argue against it.
Let's take the Sabonis part out of the conversation. I remember before Demarcus Cousins was traded, after the Bogdanovich trade, Demarcus was really excited to play with Bogey. Never really got the chance to. And then obviously after he was traded away, that's the draft where the Sacramento Kings fell into the 5th spot and took De'Aaron Fox. But what do you think about a potential, if prime Demarcus had the opportunity to play with young De'Aaron Fox, what do you think that partnership could have been like here in Sacramento?
I mean, I think it would have been probably the best pairing between two Kings players since maybe Weber and Peja. I mean, that's quite a pairing. I mean, Fox out the gate wasn't really De'Aaron Fox. He had a bad rookie year, as we know he struggled a lot, but year 2 and year 3, he turned into what we are seeing before us today, which is an all-star caliber guard. So if we could somehow keep that partnership intact, and I think the Demarcus Cousins, like rumored how he was going to be signing a max extension, I think this would have been the last season, which is kind of funny. So we would have actually had that be if the Kings would have been inclined to keep him, we would have seen that kind of pan out. Obviously, that changes the whole. It's a butterfly effect. If the Kings don't trade Boogie, they don't get De'Aaron Fox, they don't fall to 5th, yada yada. But if, let's say hypothetically, they get Fox and Cousins, I mean, we'd be in the 5th year of that pairing. So I think it would have been quite a good pairing. But obviously, 3-point shooting, Demarcus Cousins would be the leader in that category. It'd be Fox setting up Cousins for 3-pointers rather than the other way around of Cousins getting the ball in the post, kicking out to Fox. So I'm not sure if it would translate to wins, because we've seen before the Kings have had good players at the same time. I mean, Rudy Gay is, in my opinion, De'Aaron Fox is better than Rudy Gay, but the Rudy Gay, Cousins, Rondo teams didn't work. So it's kind of hard for me to sit here and say Fox and Cousins would have sent the Kings to a perennial playoff team. They'd be making the playoffs 3 or 4 years in a row now. So I don't know if I see that, but I'd be very, very into seeing that pairing work out.
I just daydream sometimes, Frankie, about like Demarcus a lot of the times would be late jogging back up the floor on defense. Sometimes it'd be because he was fouled and there was no call and he was arguing. Other times it would be he wasn't fouled and there was still no call and he's still arguing. Or he was just he was not known for getting up and down the floor quickly, but with a player like De'Aaron Fox, who that is his game, and with the idea that you want to play fast-paced offensively and defensively with De'Aaron, I wonder how willing Demarcus would have been to run the floor with them, like when they got off to that really good start in that 2018 season.
Yeah, that's the thing that came to my mind too, was when we talked about even the Sabonis Cousins pairing. Is I think if you put Cousins on a team Even in his prime, I think it slows down the team a little bit. He wasn't really known for his speed. And that 18-19 team, yeah, he kind of take that place of Willie Cauley-Stein, which is, I think Willie gets a lot of flack around the Kings fandom and in a lot of, he gets jeered and whatnot. But he was one of the reasons why that team played so well. He having a center that could outrun pretty much everybody on the floor. Willie was one of the fastest players on that team. That changes the way that the Kings play, and maybe they don't win 38 games. You never know. I'm not saying having prime Demarcus Cousins could hurt that team, the best Kings team in the last 16 years, but the thing that made them so good was their speed. And if you put a center that can kind of clog that process a little bit, it might change the outcome.
I have a feeling we have the same guy at the top of our list, but I don't want to spoil it, so I'm going to throw it to you. Who is the guy at the top of your list from the playoff drought era that you would want to add to this current Kings roster that you think could make a difference?
Just to clarify, these are players that could have been on the last playoff team, but then played for them for a couple years after the drought began, correct?
Correct. So, like, for example,
just
Mike
making
Bibby.
sure.
Mike Bibby was, of course, on the team during the 2002 team and during the glory era, but he played for the Kings for another 2 seasons after with the first 2 seasons of the playoff drought. Mike Bibby was on the roster. So that counts. You could take Mike Bibby in that conversation too.
Well, now that I know for sure, my number one pick is Meta World Peace / Ron Artest, and a friend. I think having him on this team right now, putting him at small forward, putting Harrison Barnes at the 4, it just changes everything. He was arguably a top 2, top 3 defender, lockdown on-ball defender in the NBA for a matter of for years. And having him on this team right now, especially the fact that he can score the basketball, I mean, that makes all the difference in the world for this team. But I can't even begin to imagine what it'd be like to get a time machine, just bring back Ron Artest and say, all right, let's go play 82 for this team. But that's
he's the guy that sparked this whole conversation for me. Like, just thinking about
really?
Honestly, because I wanted to make sure I didn't just make it take any Sacramento King, because everybody would have picked Mitch Richmond. Everybody would have picked Chris Webber. They would have gone to the glory years. Maybe someone would have go as far back as like Spud Webb or something like that. But like,
Oscar Robertson.
Sure. Why not? I wanted to make sure it was like at least a challenge of, okay, these are players that have been here on bad teams over the last 16 years that we think could help this team here currently. And Ron Artest is absolutely the correct answer if there is one. Like, he fits a direct need. He provides exactly what the Sacramento Kings are looking for. I have a feeling that Ron Artest would be absolutely a Mike Brown guy.
Oh yeah.
Like, Ron Artest would do so much that this roster desperately needs. Plus, he's a dog. He's a fighter. He can step out, hit the 3. He's someone who can run the floor as well. Like, Ron Artest in so many ways is the archetype ideal starting 3 for this roster. No disrespect, Harrison Barnes.
No, for sure. And for 10 years, I'm looking at this, 10 seasons, he averaged over 2 steals per game from 1999 through 2008, 2.1 steals per game, 16 points per game. I mean, what more could you want? Any rebounds? 5 rebounds per game. A forward that can rebound, get you 2 steals per game, and score when you need to. That's exactly what this team needs right now. That's kind of like, if you can make an argument what the missing piece is, like the missing piece, that's what it is. I think that people talked a lot about the Kings should go get John Collins or go get this forward, and they did bring in Keegan Murray, who I think the Kings are hoping can turn into a version of that, a forward who can do just that, get you a steal or 2 per game, block a shot, and be a threat on the perimeter. That's kind of what Ron Artest was when he was here. He would play on-ball defense that would change the outcome of games. He could knock down some shots, and I think he had the best scoring average of his career when he was here. I think he averaged 20 points per game. So he's my clear-cut number 1. As soon as you asked me to do this today, I was like, oh, it's Ron. So
yeah,
I'm glad. It's crazy we're in unison on that.
Yeah, out of all the teams that he played for, he played the majority of his time with the Los Angeles Lakers, 6 seasons with them, played 3 seasons with the Sacramento Kings. But out of every team he played for, he had his highest overall scoring averages with Sacramento. Makes sense because they kind of needed him to play that role, but averaged 18.9 points per game over the 3 combined seasons that he played here in Sacramento. 167 games and started in 159 of them. And the shooting splits are pretty encouraging too. 3-point percentage could have been better here in Sacramento, around 35%, but still that's good enough for you to at least have to worry about him on the perimeter. Overall 43% field goal or shooter from the field, 72%. So rounded up 73% from the free throw line. That, of course, could be better. But again, you're looking at someone who comes in, and I think Ron Artest right away, you plug him in with this Kings team. Fox and Sabonis are still 1 and 2. Ron Artest becomes a clear 3. And then if Harrison Barnes is starting at the 4, or if you take him off the bench and have Keegan Murray starting at the 4 regardless, and whoever you decide to do with Malik Monk or Kevin Huerter at the 2, like, I think Ron Artest instantly vaults this team into a playoff conversation at that point. That's how much of an impactful player I believe he was and would be with this Kings team.
Completely agree. I think he would be the missing piece. Like I said, I think that he is like the ideal fit, a guy who can play defense. It's Ron. So I'm that's crazy, Matt. This inspired you, because as soon as you told me, I'm like, it's Ron.
Yeah, it's absolutely
Wow.
Ron. Like it makes so much sense. I just wanted to daydream with someone about having Ron Artest on this roster, basically. But
Well,
we're not
you
stopping
asked
the
the right guy.
conversation. Yeah.
You asked the right guy to come on then.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. You can find your favorite sports and events and the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. That's BetOnline. Find reviews and news of every single league, including Major League Baseball, the NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, even golf. You can bet right now on all the NFL preseason action. Of course, all the MLB action going on right now. There's great future bets and prop bets around the NBA next season already. You can bet on where you think Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, or Donovan Mitchell are going to end up. That's just an example of the fun that you can have on BetOnline. They continue to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening right now at BetOnline, where the game starts. We're not stopping the conversation there. There's other names that I've written down. One of them, what do you think about this? He became kind of the guy here in Sacramento for a short period of time, known as a scorer, mainly as a starter, but I don't know if he would be the starting 2 on this team or if you bring him off the bench. Kevin Martin. Would Kevin Martin be a guy that you think would be interesting or an ideal fit here in Sacramento, and in what role? Like, I go back and forth on debating he would be a good starter right now for this Kings team because he can shoot. We know how good he was at attacking the basket and drawing fouls, but he also could be a microwave off the bench that this Kings team could use as well.
Yeah, he's on my list too. He actually is, it's funny. You might be identical list, Matt. Having Kevin Martin on his team for sure, a team that coming into the offseason needed so much shooting. I mean, if you asked me this question 2 months ago, I'd say yes. Like, he would be #1 maybe on my list, having one of the best 3-point shooters the Kings have ever had on this team. But I think it's an interesting argument, because if you talk about the Kings, how Kevin Huerter, he has some more length to him, I believe, than Kevin Martin. What is Kevin Huerter? 6'8", 6'7", and
6'8",
Kevin Martin. How tall is Kevin Martin? 6'5".
Yeah, he wasn't. He wasn't as tall as I remember, but I'll get that number for you.
Kmart is 6.
Oh, he's 6'7".
He's 6'7". He's 6'7". Okay, I'll put some respect on Kevin Martin then. I thought for some reason, when you think back to those days, I imagine like 6'4".
Yeah, I thought he was 6'5".
Okay, well, Kevin Martin can bring some length too. So if you think about it, maybe kind of similar there as far as the length they can bring. But I think you bring an interesting point, bringing him off the bench is like a microwave scorer, because the Kings kind of looked at Buddy Hield as that the last couple of years, and it didn't really work out. Maybe Kevin Martin would be more inclined to fit that role. I know he did that on Oklahoma City and was a pretty good player for them for a playoff run. So yeah, I'm on board bringing Kevin Martin on. He can knock down threes, has that great motion that everyone tried to kind of impersonate on the playground back in 2007 or 8. So yeah, I love bringing Kevin Martin on. I'm on board.
When I think of Kmart, I think of that shooting motion. But Frankie, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't remember Kmart playing a lick of defense. Like, and that's not to say like he was a horrendous defender or anything. I'm not talking like James Harden level of just didn't care on the defensive end. I just don't remember any defensive highlights or significant defensive moments from Kmart. Am I missing something?
No, and like I'm kind of looking back at his body of work here, and it's surprising that he had 1.2 steals in 2007, 1.2 again in 2009. So it's there. I mean, he I don't know if that means he's a plus defender, but the steals are there. I don't remember him being known as a lockdown defender or even a plus defender though. So I'm not too sure, but I know that Kevin Huerter, probably just based off of what we've seen, he's probably a slightly better defender than Kevin Martin was at his best. So that might kind of put Huerter a little bit ahead in that starting caliber role. But you could always use shooters. And if Kevin Martin can't play defense, I mean, we just watched Buddy Hield play the worst defense of any Kings player, for the last 4 or 5 years. So I doubt anything could be much worse than that. So I think
And
that should be fine.
we really got to put some respect on Kmart's name too, because he had a really impressive 3-year scoring stretch for Sacramento. 20 points per game, then 23.7 points per game, then 24.6 points per game, year after year after year from 2006, which was the first season of the playoff drought, all the way to the 2008-2009 season. So he embraced a primary scoring role, and he did it really well. And like, people talk about the shooting motion, people talk about his ability to hit an outside shot, which is absolutely important, but he had a lot of James Harden's game of drawing fouls. Kevin Martin had that game as well. Didn't necessarily have to rely on the whistle as much as James does at times. Now, James is an absolute master of using that whistle to his advantage, better than Kevin Martin ever was. But I remember Kevin being someone who drew a lot of contact and was a really underrated finisher around the rim, plus was a very good free throw shooter. I think for his career, he is a 87% free throw shooter over the course of his career. So there's a lot that Kevin Martin could do here in Sacramento offensively. Defensively, there's question marks, but again, a microwave score off the bench offensively, Kevin Martin makes a lot of sense.
He's a bucket getter. I mean, again, like, that's the thing I said all last season was the Kings needed a bucket getter so bad, because, if Harrison Barnes wasn't on and Fox wasn't on, there really wasn't much there for them. Especially pre-Sabonis. I mean, Tyrese Haliburton was great too, but his hot stretches were kind of rare. He was more of a distributor. So having a player like that on this team, and in the past couple of years, would be a huge positive. Having someone that can come in, knock it down from 3, perimeter, and like you said, the free throw line, which I remember him being nearly automatic from the free throw line. It would be a huge help. And obviously, Kevin Martin over those years, I mean, it's kind of like we're going with De'Aaron Fox right now. He was a player that was an all-star caliber talent, and all that kind of kept him back and held him back. Well, number one was injuries, but number two was the win-loss record, because those years when he averaged 24.5 a game, those are all-star numbers. And unfortunately, it just didn't happen for him.
I feel like if we were to poll most NBA fans and maybe most Kings fans, they would say Rudy Gay is better than Harrison Barnes. But Frankie, by how much? Or do you think it's more of a debate than that? I think it's a debate.
I think it's a legitimate debate. I think that's a very good debate. I think that a Twitter poll would be a very interesting. It's gotta be split though, right? I mean, are people really more on the side of Rudy Gay is better than Harrison Barnes? Like, as a basketball player?
I think the reason why is Rudy Gay has a much more polished and refined offensive game than Harrison has. Rudy was a 3-level scorer, and Harrison could score when they needed to, but Rudy was a great scorer throughout his career. Memphis, Sacramento, even a little bit in San Antonio. Harrison Barnes really was a primary scorer role in Dallas, didn't go too well, and he's had flashes here at Sacramento, but been inconsistent. Now, I think Harrison is a better defender than Rudy Gay, but I think because of offensive and offensive-minded league, I think the majority of people would say, no, Rudy Gay is better than Harrison Barnes.
Well, they remember,
or
like,
maybe
the
not
game
now.
Well, the game winners and like the flashy dunks, and Rudy Gay was, I think when the Kings traded for him, he was a budding. People thought he was going to be a star. I mean, even a year or two before that, when he was in Toronto, he was someone who people thought was going to be a star, and it never really worked out that way. He never made an all-star team, but he was still a very impactful player, in my opinion. And I think I think Rudy Gay will be remembered as a good NBA player. He was exciting. We say bucket getter a lot. We've said it a lot on this podcast, but he was that in every sense. And he also was like a 2K legend. I mean, every time you use him on 2K, easy 40 points. So I don't know though. I think when it comes to who would I rather have on the team, I might be leaning Harrison Barnes because of the fact that he is a better defender. He has been known to move the ball around. He had so many games last year with 5+ assists. I think he tied his career high of 8 assists a couple times last year too. We didn't really see that from Rudy Gay very much. Rudy Gay would kind of try to take over games, and sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. But I think HB never really gets out of his lane. And while he did get hot a couple times last season, and he has those big games, I don't think he ever tries to play outside of his comfort zone. And that's huge to me, because I think we got frustrated with Rudy a lot for those, like, it was like the pre-Buddy Hield era, like, what are you doing? You know, the turnaround fadeaways in the corner or when he's being double teamed. It just, sometimes it get kind of frustrating, but I don't know. That's a really tough debate. Who's better? I'm very intrigued to know how everybody else feels. Like, would you rather have Rudy Gay in 2014 or Harrison Barnes like the last 2 years? Because it's a pretty close debate in my opinion.
I think Rudy Gay rather makes the team significantly more exciting, but I think Harrison Barnes is the better fit. And I think
I
that's
agree.
what's important to this roster right now is the Kings are looking for better fit pieces. In this
Mhm.
conversation, again, we're trying to add talent to this roster that helps them accomplish their goal. Rudy Gay comes in and expects to be a top guy on offense. Harrison Barnes fills that role offensively,
Mhm.
fills whatever role you need him, and is just a solid everyday starter. I think there's a great argument to be made for both sides. And Locked On Kings listeners, if you want to get loose on that in the comment section or send both Frankie and I on Twitter your thoughts on that, let's talk about
Yeah.
that because I think that could be a
I'm
really fun debate.
I'm intrigued. I want to know. Please let us know because I really want to know what people think about that. Rudy Gay, because don't you think it would kind of slow down the offense? It kind of clog things up a little bit because
I remember Rudy Gay having a few times where he dribbled the air out of the ball, where he dribbled from 17 on the shot clock to 6 on the shot clock, and then it's that did happen from time to time. And I remember that used to frustrate Demarcus Cousins at times as well. But I also think there was another level of Rudy's game that he didn't get the opportunity to take his game to in Sacramento because he wasn't playing in as meaningful of games as he could have been. I think Rudy Gay would have been a really good player for Sacramento in a playoff series. Of course, that never happened,
well,
so we'll never really know.
I guess if we would have had Michael Malone as a head coach, still maybe we would have seen that. But
Ugh, don't rip
sorry,
that Band-Aid off.
little knife twist for you. We can move on though.
Those are the main names that I wanted to talk about. I do have other names on my list, and I know you do as well. I'm going to throw out one more for us to discuss really briefly, and then you can kind of share with me other names on your list potentially. But this one is not nearly as exciting, but I thought about it and I thought, yeah, he could be someone that the Kings could actually use. Dante Green. Like, I remember Dante Green being a bit of a goofball, having a lot of fun. I actually had him on the Locked On Kings podcast either last offseason or the offseason before that. I can't remember. And we reminisced about some of his memories here. But Dante, granted, it was a bad team or a lot of bad teams that he was on, but Dante was oftentimes the go-to defender for Sacramento during that time. He has good length, good athleticism, a true wing, someone who could be a good defender coming off of your bench and an offensive player, could shoot the three. I like the idea of Dante Green potentially he wouldn't be the first guy that I would choose over the last 16 years to add to this roster, but someone who I think makes sense.
No, I mean, and I would say kind of how the Kings with KZ Okpala, like a lengthy defender off the bench to come in and kind of say, okay, go guard him, go get the Kevin Durant's for 5 or 10 minutes, go get the Kawhi Leonard's. I mean, Dante Green would be a guy the Kings could probably have off the bench and use him for that length. And maybe he's not expected to lock down these players, but they have more length than Harrison Barnes or any other player on the team that can kind of keep up with those guys with that foot speed. So I like that move. And also it'd be a lot of fun. And the Goon Squad would come back. It'd be really fun to have the bench
Yes.
jumping every game. Sign Lady could bust out those signs again. I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of piggyback off that real quick. Piggybacking because I have a guy on my list that kind of was in that era who fits that mold of lengthy defender and isn't like the sexiest pick to throw on this team, but it's a position of need and a place of need. I'm going Sam Dalembert to be coming off the bench. I forgot about how I just think that year was so skimmed over. I think we were kind of lost in the potential relocation to Anaheim that the Sam Dalembert team, Dalembert Cousins during Cousins' rookie year. I mean, even in 1 year at the Kings, kind of at the end of his career, averages 1.5 blocks per game over 80 games. And for his career, almost 2 blocks per game. I don't know when the last time the Kings had a center that averaged near 2 blocks per game. I really can't say off the top of my head. Can you? Because I don't recall.
That's a great shout. I don't even remember.
I don't know.
I don't think so. Like, that's a great. I didn't even think of Dalembert because, like you said, we kind of gloss over that year with everything that was going on, and plus those kind of DeMarcus coming into his own. But Samuel Dalembert provides a lot of the rim protection that this team desperately lacks. I think we're almost hoping that, to some extent, Richaun Holmes is going to be able to fill that void a little bit just with his length and athleticism off the bench next year. So that's an interesting shout. I like that one, Frankie. That's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, 8-8 with 1.5 blocks per game. That'd be nice to have off the bench right now. And again, if Richaun Holmes can be, I think Richaun tweeted the other day about like reinventing himself. I'm not sure if that's like a nod to a new role for next year or just in general in life, but having him off the bench, being impactful like he was with those Phoenix Suns teams or those 76ers teams, that could be huge because Richaun, when he is going, is a guy who can be 1.5 blocks per game, can bring that off the bench. So if the Kings can have that in Rashawn, that's huge. But if they can't, going back in time and bringing back Sam Dallenberg is not a bad idea.
I'm going to rattle off the rest of the names that I had written down. Don't feel as passionately about these ones as I do about the others that we've discussed. But if any of these kind of ring a bell and that you want to touch on, feel free. I wrote down Beno Udrih, but I threw a little question mark next to it. I love Beno.
I have him too, though.
I like Beno. I was a huge fan of Beno, and I think Beno would make. I mean, if he's the third point guard on this team, okay. But he, like Mr. Stop and Pop, like he was a bucket from mid range. People forget, like that shot was automatic, and he was an overall smart player. So he definitely would be someone I'd be very happy to have at point guard depth here.
Ideal backup point guard right there. Like an ideal, like having Davion maybe play off ball a little bit, but having Beno run the offense, that'd be great in my opinion. So yeah, I'm on board.
I wrote down Seth Curry. Now, this was before Seth Curry really became Seth Curry as we know him today. This was the Seth Curry that was basically told in Sacramento by, if I'm not mistaken, George Karl, that he was not really going to have that great of a career. And look what he's done for himself. Now, he lives in his brother's shadow, unfortunately, but has done a really good job to carve out a solid NBA career and has had a lot of good years. So Seth Curry is definitely someone that I wish was on the Kings roster right now. He's on there. I also wrote down Matt Barnes for just the intensity, kind of the hustle, also plays that 3 spot. I wrote down Iman Shumpert. I felt like I had to just based off of what he was to that Kings team in 2018. And a guy that I love still to this day, one of my favorite guys to ever cover in the Kings locker room, and someone who could help this roster and would definitely be towards the end of the bench depth at this point, but still a valuable piece, is Garrett Temple. Like, I'm a big G-Temp fan, so I think Garrett Temple is always a good player to have on your roster.
Oh, I agree. I wanted the Kings to bring him back 2 years ago, I think, too, before he signed a 3-year deal, I believe, with New Orleans. I'm a huge Garrett Temple guy. The year we're in, I think it was 2017-18 when Fox's first year, I just became a huge Garrett Temple fan. So always on board bringing GT back. I have those names too. I had Udrih. I had Seth Curry. And I have one that's kind of like, I don't know if it's political, but like Tyreke Evans. I mean, I don't see what off the bench, maybe. I mean, a guy that can just go play 2 or 3 at this point. I don't know. I mean, I don't think he was a bad NBA player in that second, third year. I just think he wasn't what he was his rookie year, and he's regressed a little bit. Because if you even look what he did before his suspension, he wasn't bad. I mean, he never really was like a bad NBA player. He just wasn't great.
I thought about this a lot, and I'll tell you why I decided to leave him off my list. First off, I think he is a 3. Like you play him at that 3 spot, but he's so ball dominant that I don't think he fits by any means with De'Aaron and with Sabonis and with that. Like, Tyreke did a good job to work on his jumper to where that 3-point jump shot was a little more consistent, a little more refined, certainly than his rookie year when he'd launch it literally behind his head like a catapult and it would go 90 feet in the air like Kyle Korver. But ultimately, I don't think it fits. I don't think it works. And it's not because Tyreke is not a good basketball player. I had a lot of fun covering, or being a fan rather, of Tyreke's rookie season. That was a lot of fun, a great year. And it's unfortunate that he couldn't become more. And of course, we know the drama off the court that he's dealt with over the last couple of years. But I personally don't think Tyreke would really make sense and make the Sacramento Kings team that much better. That's why I left him off. But Tyreke is absolutely one of the best players that the Kings have had during this playoff drought for a short period of time.
It's unfortunate how it panned out. I mean, if you could go back in time and be in that offseason after his rookie year, you would think we had the next perennial all-star in the league.
Absolutely.
And it just didn't happen that way. But no, you're right. The ball dominant aspect would not be a fit. Obviously, that means you have to be like a point guard in that second unit, which I don't think would work out. I wouldn't want to take the ball out of Davion's hands either, because we saw how good he was as a ball dominant guard when Fox was out last year. So maybe it wouldn't be a fit, but maybe I'm just also a little nostalgic and I'm just kind of wanting to bring him back and have it work out this time. But yeah. Sorry, Tyreke.
Sorry, Tyreke. Well, regardless, Frankie, we do have hope that this roster, we'll end with this. Is it an overreaction? Because it feels natural for me to say this, although I definitely overreacted to last year's roster and they let us all down. This feels like the above and beyond best roster that the Sacramento Kings have constructed top to bottom since they last made the playoffs in that 2005-2006 season. Do you agree with that, or do we still need to see, do we actually need to see basketball games from this group before we can make such a claim?
I mean, on paper, it's hard to disagree and say that a team has been better over the past 16 years. I think there's like an argument maybe for that 15-16 year with Cousins and Rudy Gay and Rajon Rondo, Caspi, when they brought in Caron Butler, Kufis. There's an argument there. Barnes, there's an argument there. But I think that on paper right now, and when you count the fact that the Kings brought in a very good coaching staff, that makes all the difference in the world too, to pair good players that they brought in. Because Kevin Huerter is widely seen as a good NBA player. Malik Monk had the best season of his career and was maybe one of the only things that worked for that Lakers team last year. Keegan Murray was the MVP of Summer League. Everything on paper in this offseason has been as perfect as you can imagine. So there's not much more else you could have hoped for. So I'll say, yeah, maybe we need to see some basketball games, but I agree. This is the best roster they've had since the drought started. I will say, I've said this before, though. I said this back when I just started writing for KHTK, and I remember I wrote these off-season or free agent previews, and I remember thinking, I swear on my life, I thought the Kings should really – I wrote this. The Kings should go after Corey Joseph, Trevor Ariza, Dwayne Dedmon. I think I wanted them to go after Seth Curry again, but they got 3 of those guys. And I remember saying this is the best roster they've had throughout. And had to kind of backpedal on that. But this is different, right? I hope it's different. I think it's different.
Please, God, be different. No.
Please.
we're begging you at this point. Again, 2 guys that have been through the trenches, not just covering this team, but as fans of this team, growing up with this team. We've been through all this hell with all y'all. That's why I knew I had to have Frankie on for this fun conversation. We're going to get through these dog days of the offseason, Frankie. Soon we'll have training camp, and there are so many storylines around this upcoming training camp that I know that you're going to write about and discuss on KHTK. I'm sure we'll come back together at some point, whether it's here on Locked On Kings or on the Return of the Roar podcast that you host with Chris Watkins, to discuss these training camp battles, because they're going to be a big deal. And then, of course, next season, you'll provide excellent coverage like you always do over there at the at Sactown Sports 1140. So I appreciate so much what you do, Frankie. Thanks for coming back on, and I'm glad you and I are on the same page with Ron Artest / Meta World Peace.
Hey, man, that was a good surprise. Thanks for having me on. Let's see if we can go get that time machine figured out.
Was a pleasure having Frankie on. Doesn't surprise me that he and I both got Ron Artest / Meta World Peace at the top of our list. Was he at the top of your list, or was someone else? We probably talked about most of the guys that you might have been thinking of, but maybe there are others that we missed out on that you want to make an argument for. We mentioned Mike Bibby, but we didn't actually talk about having Mike Bibby on this Kings roster, mostly because De'Aaron Fox is currently here, but maybe Mike Bibby was on your list. Tell me why. Let's talk about it. At Matt George Sack on Twitter, if you want to tweet me. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, please join the conversation in the YouTube comment section down below. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Locked On Kings podcast. Another week in the books. We're 1 week closer to the start of the training camp, start of preseason, start of the regular season. Really excited about that, but I have more great content, great guests coming for you on next week's Locked On Kings podcast. Plus, we have a great series coming up in early September highlighting all of the individual training camp battles for different rotational positions or roster spots on this Kings team next year. Brendan Nunez is going to join me for that series. So I hope you will you tune in for that and keep an eye out for when that drops again in early September. Thanks for all your support. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.